I'm here with another book review. This time it is for the most popular book of the year, reading along that Criminale is doing and several other people are doing. This month's book was Clive Barker's The Hellbound Heart, which inspired Hellraiser. And if anybody was like me who was traumatized by the VHS box in the local Blockbuster when they were browsing through, Hellraiser is very different, I think, from the book in kind of, at least in how it's presented. Hellraiser, the novella, or The Hellbound Heart, the novella, is very distinctly Clive Barker. I've never read Clive Barker before except his YA series, Aberrat, which I thought was very, very good. Clive Barker was always sort of, when I was growing up, he was always kind of the taboo horror author. Like, Stephen King was one thing, but Clive Barker, he was something completely different. Clive Barker was out there. But when you actually read his stuff, at least the stuff I've seen, and Hellbound Heart, which is probably the more famous because Hellraiser was based on it, to me, he's not that out there. Like, I understand the violence level of stuff that he goes with things, and kind of that tying with sexuality and stuff like that a little bit, but I guess there is a lot more extreme stuff out there now. There's a lot more splatter horror and extreme horror and all those sort of things, to the point that Clive Barker to me seems a little bit on the tame side. Like, I don't read splatterpunk and extreme horror and things like that. I can't stomach it very well, but Clive Barker I'm fine with, and I think that's kind of the difference here. He's also an incredibly good author, just in general. Hellbound Heart is about this truly horrible person named Frank, and he has a brother, Rory, I believe it's Rory, who is married to this kind of awful woman named Julia, and there is another woman involved who I actually forget her name because she's so, I believe it's the character in the movie Hellraiser that they made was sort of the relative, but in this one she's completely not related to anybody. Frank is this just sort of decadent, horrible person. He's just kind of a degenerate and just awful. He's traveled all around and everywhere. Rory, his brother, is kind of the boring one. And Frank has heard about this puzzle box that has this sort of wonderful world of pleasure when you end up opening it or figuring it out. And Frank figures it out. It's called the Lamarckand. Its configuration in the movie, it's the lament configuration. It's what they keep calling it in the movie. They call it the lament configuration, but he's named it something else. I understand why Clive Barker changed it when he made the movie. And it's this person's last name. And you open the puzzle box, and suddenly you have another dimension opened where you have these kind of horrible creatures called the Cenobites, who, very famously, Pinhead is the most famous one that you see his image on the Hellraiser copies of everything. And they come through and basically suck Frank into their dimension because they're, we'll show you our definition of pleasure, which is basically torture. So he is stuck in this other dimension. He's still in the house that he and Rory owned. Rory's just moving into that area. They've taken over the house. No one knows what's happened to Frank. He's disappeared, but then he always kind of comes and goes. So Rory and his wife go in there, and they end up, Julia kind of stumbles across the dimension, the portal to this dimension, by accident. It's triggered by blood. And she has this thing for Frank and has always had this thing for Frank, to the point that, like, she cheated on her wedding day with Frank because he's such a wild man and this is what she wants, and the passion, and Rory's so boring. The other female friend is just infatuated with Rory, but she's like in the friend zone completely, and sort of is, oh, poor Rory, Julia, who's beautiful and wonderful, and what he's thinking, just is kind of a horrible human. So as this proceeds, Julia starts doing things to help Frank rejuvenate, not reanimate, because he's still alive. He's just stuck in another dimension. More turn himself back into a human, because they talk in great detail about how he looks like a terrible, tortured, horrible wreck that you can't even really tell is a human anymore, to the point she's grossed out every time she looks at him. But every time that you have a body in the room, so you can imagine what's happening, every time you have a body put in the room, he regenerates a little more. So I guess he's regenerating here. He's Wolverineing it up. And it eventually comes to a big head, like it does in the movie, between all of these, the Cenobites and Frank, and all of these sort of forces kind of at once coming together to ultimately end up with the end result. That being said, Clive Barker does a very good job of making even unlikable characters you kind of feel a little bit for. Like, Julie is completely unlikable, but you also feel for her a little bit, because Frank's playing her, and his thoughts and everything, and she's doing all of this for nothing, basically, for this horrible human, because she's so deluded. The only one who could just go choke on a chicken bone is Frank, because he's just horrible. There's nothing to me that redeems him at any point in time. But everybody else you just kind of feel a little bit bad for, except maybe Julie, but you do still feel a little bit bad for her. But that is the whole novel. Novella. It is very worth reading, particularly if you like Hellraiser. If you want to see the differences between those two things, I think Hellraiser's played a very different way. To me, Hellbound Heart is much more actually plot-driven and mystery-driven, and a little like, how is this going to unfold? Whereas when you put it into a visual media, it changes it a little bit, and the emphasis in certain things changes a little. So I would definitely recommend reading, if you've never read Clive Barker before, starting with Hellbound Heart and trying out what kind of became the iconic Hellraiser series and the iconic Pinhead and the Cenobites and all that very famous horror aspect of everything.